internalize.
Yeah.
All right, let us stop sharing.
Go to the, I need that screen.
Where's your presentation?
Need to, you loaded it, no? Okay. Okay, okay, it's okay. Yeah. Put it on screen, large screen. Put it on large screen. This will show. This screen is shown. This. Yeah, no presenters view will show in this. Yeah, presenters view will show in this. We need to change it to, what is it showing? Is it on?
No,
No, it just change it. Use your laptop. Bring your laptop. Bring it. It's a mess. Okay, it's on. Okay, doesn't matter. Go ahead. Go ahead. Connect. This works.
this works. This is what works.
Put it on. Connect. Connect. Just tell him it's a glitch. It's connected.
You tell them that glitch at the end.
Yeah. Is my mic on? Sorry about this. There's a small glitch. We just correcting it. Apart, I mean, apologize for the delay. Welcome.
Just look at closely and tell me what you're seeing.
I've seen nothing in my screen. But you have kept this. This needs to go. Shall I close this? Close. I can't see anything. It's a regular view.
What? Do you hear yourself talking?
I can hear you first.
I need presenters. Okay. I'm sorry, I'll start all over again. Yeah, you go the same. The orofacial cleft is a result of the, am I on? The orofacial cleft is a result of the failure of embryonic fusion, which should have occurred between the 4th and 6th weeks of intrauterine life. It affects the lip, the nose, the teeth, hearing, speech, mastication, swallowing, the midface skeleton, social outlook, and the family. At times, it can also affect life expectancy. As we all know, in spite of having various suspect genetic and environmental factors, the cause of non-syndromic clefting is still unknown. Our only recourse yet is to try and surgically correct what nature failed to do. The management is multidisciplinary and begins at birth or even earlier. We have more than 18 medical and paramedical specialties involved in the care of children till they complete their growth and are fully restored to their normal form and function. These pre-op photos of babies with unilateral and these are pre-op photos of babies with unilateral and bilateral clefts. The pictures on the right side are post-op, 2 to 3 years following lip and palate repair. This girl came to us following a poorly done lip repair when she was 7 years old. We revised her lip and her palate. She's quite a good looking girl, as you can see, and she was chosen as the poster girl for Smile Train. Incidentally, this poster is displayed on the New York office of the Smile Train. You would normally expect her to grow into this lovely young woman you see on the right-hand side. However, nature decides otherwise. This was her at 17 years. In these children, the midface does not grow normally, possibly because of the scarring from previous operations. She had orthognathic surgery to correct her midface on completion of her growth at about 18 years. And this is from the left to right, pre-op, immediate post-op, 1 year and 4 years following surgery. This busy slide is our timeline for management of orofacial clefts. The procedures in red are applicable to all patients, while those in black are done only when needed. If there is a prenatal diagnosis, we start with counseling the mom and the family and prepare them for what to expect at birth. At birth, our nutritionist and the feeding nurse see the mother along with the pediatrician and guide the mother and family on feeding. Since eustachian dysfunction can be associated with cleft palate, the babies undergo a hearing screen at that time. In some bilateral cases, we start them on nasoalveolar molding to optimize the position of the lip and the nose. I don't do that for unilateral cases, though some people do. But I like it in some cases of bilateral when there is an anticipate difficulty with repair. We repair the lip at when the baby is 6 months old, and we repair the palate when the baby's just before the baby completes his or her first birthday. Basically, that's before they start speaking. The next major intervention, mandatory intervention, is alveolar bone grafting to restore the alveolar process of the maxilla to one piece so that the permanent teeth, particularly the canine, can erupt normally. Finally, on completion of growth, depending on the patient, they may need orthognathic surgery, lip revision, or rhinoplasty to restore them to their near genetic potential of normal form and function. These pictures you see, unfortunately, are the results of operations performed carelessly or possibly due to the lack of skill. All these pictures are of patients who came to us in the past few years following primary operations at centers in and around Tamil Nadu. We do salvage these patients, but this needs a considerable amount of time, money, energy, and patience. So I shall take you through a case report. This is a nurse who came to us when she was about 24 years old. She had several unsuccessful operations from childhood at different centers and was finally told that nothing more could be done to help her. As you can see, she had multiple problems with her lip, her nose, palate, teeth, mid-face, and she had terrible speech. She had several procedures. We took about 4 years to complete work on her. We worked on her palate, alveolar arches. You can see the pre and post-op, palatal fistulae, teeth, and her speech as well. In addition to this, she had mid-face advancement and lip nose revision. The row of pictures you see at the bottom of the slide, that's her pre-op, that's a profile pre-op. This was during her distraction osteogenesis to build her maxilla. That was her immediate post-op, 1 year and 4 years down the line. This was the photos on the left row are pre-treatment and the right one are 4 years post-op. These are craniofacial deformities, which are distinct but related to clefts. Sometimes craniosynostosis requires urgent intervention in the first few months of life, and this requires early identification and referral. Mostly, this is done by the pediatricians, as we all agree. However, most corrections are elective when the child is a bit older. To summarize, a comprehensive cleft care requires a multidisciplinary team working together to restore the child to its original genetic form and function. Primary correction should be meticulous and affords the best chance for this. However, with several centers with various skill levels active, unfortunately, suboptimal and poor outcomes are common and require a lot more effort and resources to rehabilitate. Thank you very much for your patient listening.
Thank you very much, sir. That was a very informative talk. We again apologize for the glitches in the poor internet connection. May I now request Professor Ramachandran to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Padmasini, please.
Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Uh, Very good afternoon to all the people who have gathered here. I would like to introduce the next speaker for this session. Is Dr. Ellen Padmasini. She is an MD in pediatrics and also in MRCP. She's a professor of pediatrics at Department of Pediatrics at Sri Ramchandra Medical College and Research Center attached to Sriha. And her journey, especially in the cleft lip and palate and the smile train, started way back from 1998 as a part of the multidisciplinary team. And then she worked with Professor Jyotsna Murthy to bring the smile train to Sriha in the year 2001. From then onwards, she has been working relentlessly with the team of the orofacial cleft smile train team, along with the people from all the other disciplines, to care for the children and their families in a big way. She has been also doctoral research papers and guided PhD scholars, especially some of the nutritional aspects of feeding these children. And currently, she is an advisor to Smile Train on the nutritional support for these babies, and she was also the co-chair in the task force in the early care of infants with clefts in the World Cleft Congress in 2017, and helpful in formulating the guidelines. Once again, she is a person who is very, very much interested in patient care, good services, and research, and building up a part of a good team. Over to Dr. Padmasini, talking about the role of pediatrician in early identification and prompt referral and follow-up of these children. Professor Padmasini.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words of introduction. Good afternoon to all the participants to the CME program. I thank the organizers for this opportunity. I will now start sharing my screen. Dr. Altaf has very elegantly explained why it is important to have a multidisciplinary team to provide care to these children. He has also given us the timelines of the various aspects of care for these children. Over the next 20 minutes, I will describe the role of a pediatrician in the management of these children. Orofacial cleft is among the commonest congenital anomalies. The incidence is as high as 1 in 600 live births. So a busy general pediatrician can expect to see 1 to 2 cases every month in his general practice. Though the care should come from a multidisciplinary team, very often it is the general pediatrician who has to anchor the care. The team members should include specialists from pediatrics, plastic surgery, ENT, audiology, speech pathology, pedodontics, orthodontics, psychology, genetics, and nursing. The care starts from the time of prenatal diagnosis and continues into adulthood. The pediatrician will be the first healthcare provider that the parents will encounter. And if this encounter is a positive experience for the parents, it goes a long way in building up the confidence of the family in their ability to provide care to these babies. The role of the pediatrician includes a full assessment of the child and a complete diagnosis, immediate care for the acute needs of the child, ongoing healthcare maintenance like for any other child, anticipatory guidance. Very importantly, helping the parents find a good cleft team and timely referral to the various specialists in the team. The pediatrician also is responsible for preoperative evaluation for fitness for surgery and liaison between the family and the team. Now, very often prenatal scans are making a diagnosis of cleft. There are pros and cons of a prenatal diagnosis. The pros are that the parents have time for psychological preparation. There is an opportunity for parental education. The care can be planned. The feeding techniques can be taught. the family can verify insurance coverage and accordingly choose the place where they want to take their care. There is an opportunity for genetic testing. There is a potential for fetal surgical repair. However, we are not recommending this because of the excellent results we get with postnatal repair and the option of termination. The cons of a prenatal diagnosis are, of course, the high levels of parental anxiety and, very unfortunately, the increased chances of discontinuation of pregnancy. This is really unfortunate because many of these children have the potential to be perfectly normal, healthy adults if they get the correct care at the right time. So what does a pediatrician do when the family meets him with the prenatal diagnosis? Usually a cleft of the lip or alveolus can be detected as early as 13 to 14 weeks gestation. The sonologist would also have looked for syndromic associations, and invariably they also screen for other congenital malformations once they find a cleft. If associated anomalies are detected, amniocentesis for genetic testing should be offered to the family. But it is important to remember that most of these infants with cleft lip, with or without cleft of the palate, do not have an underlying syndrome. They typically do not need delivery in a high-risk obstetric unit. It is also important to remember that all congenital anomalies cannot be detected in the prenatal scan. It is important that the family also understands this. So when they meet the pediatrician discusses the diagnosis and presents the facts. They explain what is to be expected after the birth of the baby, the management protocol for these children. But again, do not overwhelm the family with too many details. Give information on the centers which have good experience and the resources to manage their baby. Arrange for a meeting with the cleft team to learn about the care of these children, and if needed, genetic counseling. The final point is very important. Regardless of what we counsel, regardless of the good results that we get after surgery, the parents can decide whether they want to continue or terminate the pregnancy. Whatever be their decision, we will respect their decision and not be judgmental. At birth, the initial focus is on airway assessment. The neonatal resuscitation protocol should be followed like for any other newborn. Following establishment of the airway, evaluate the sucking and establish feeding. Provide psychological support for the mother and encourage emotional bonding. Routine newborn care should not be forgotten. Vitamin K, warmth, immunization at birth, these are all as important as for other babies. We have had newborn babies being hurriedly wrapped in a blanket and sent in an ambulance to our center. This is not needed. There is no urgency. The immediate care can be given at the place of birth. Also, isolated cleft palate may not be identified in some newborns before discharge, and we have seen these infants presenting later with feeding difficulties and poor weight gain. So every newborn, the palate should be visualized during the initial newborn examination in the birth hospital to exclude a cleft palate. A brief mention about one specific syndromic cleft palate. This is Peary-Robbins sequence. The cleft palate is associated with microretinonathia and glossoptosis. In these infants, the airway is compromised by the small receding chin and by the tongue falling backwards. These infants may deceptively look well in the first week of life, but a short time later, they develop serious airway, feeding, and weight gain problems. So it is important that the pediatrician anticipates these potential problems. This is a Peary-Robbins syndrome with a small receding chin. Management of the airway, we first try non-invasive measures like prone positioning, nasopharyngeal airway, and nasal CPAP. When these non-invasive measures fail, surgical intervention may be required. Tongue-lip adhesion is the least invasive surgical procedure. The plastic surgeon in our unit pulls out the tongue and sutures it to the lip. This not only helps in maintaining the airway, it also improves the feeding and helps in weight gain. Very often with a timely tongue-lip adhesion, tracheostomy and nasogastric feeding can be avoided. After stabilization, the pediatrician does a complete physical examination to look for other anomalies and syndromic associations. Other anomalies are more often seen in isolated cleft palate and in cleft lip and palate. They are less common in isolated cleft lip. Among these, cardiac anomalies are the commonest, and among the cardiac anomalies, septal defects are the commonest. These additional findings will guide the further investigations of these children. A syndromic association, if it is suggested on physical examination, will require a genetic consultation. It is important to keep in mind the variation in the age of presentation of different anomalies. And even if there are no anomalies detected at birth, these children will require follow-up till at least 5 years of age. It is expected that children with cleft will have feeding difficulties and will require a lot of support in the first few days to establish feeding. There is failure to generate a sufficient negative pressure due to suction. There is nasal regurgitation because of the cleft palate, and there is choking due to aspiration into the nasopharynx. There is excessive air intake. This fills up the stomach, leading to early satiety. The baby tires fast, and there is maternal discomfort and exhaustion. Till now, no single correct method of feeding has been identified for these babies. There are several feeding options: direct breastfeeding, cup and spoon, indigenous feeding devices like Paladai and the Nifty cup, special bottles, special teats, and sometimes a combination of several feeding methods. As a last resort, a nasogastric tube can be used. Most of the children who come refer to our centers with nasogastric tube. We successfully remove the tube and establish good feeding practices with one of the above methods. A word about feeding plates. They were very popular about 2 decades ago, but we do not use feeding plates in our center. It not only increases the chances of infection to the baby, we see multiple cases when they erode the palate, they cause palatal ulceration and necrosis, and they make the subsequent repair very difficult for the surgeons. Because the infant is growing very rapidly, the maxilla also grows, and these feeding plates have to be replaced once in few weeks if they have to be used at all. We do not recommend the use of feeding plates. Regardless of the feeding method that is chosen by the family, the feeding position is very important. This is the position in which the baby should be held for feeding. The upper body should be at 45 degrees to the horizontal. This not only helps in the swallowing action, it also reduces the chances of regurgitation of milk through the nose, and it reduces the chances of gastroesophageal reflux. All pediatricians know why breast milk should be prioritized. The breast milk may be either direct or expressed. With adequate support, most mothers can do breastfeeding. The feeding device will be the family's choice. The family needs to be educated that milk will escape through the nose. It is expected. Unlike in a normal infant, it does not indicate choking. These infants will need to be burped often because they take in a lot of air while feeding. And no feed should last for more than 30 minutes. Longer feedings can cause exhaustion, both to the baby and to the mother. It burns up too many calories and it impairs weight gain. Every mother should be encouraged to put the baby to breast for 5 minutes on each side. It is true that the baby may not have an effective suck, but this sucking is not as a source of food. It is for a comfort to the baby. Sucking is essential to the emotional health of infants. It promotes bonding between the mother and the child. It helps in the development of oromotor skills. It helps in stimulating milk production in the mother. So once again, I repeat, every mother should be encouraged to put her baby to breast for the first 5 minutes on each side. After 5 minutes, the baby should be removed. The remaining milk should be expressed and emptied because regular emptying of the breast is important to maintain lactation. The tremendous benefits of breast milk are known to all, but breast milk is particularly beneficial in children with cleft because it does not irritate the delicate tissue of the nose and throat as much as formula milk, and it significantly reduces the risk of ear problems, ear infections in these children. Direct breastfeeding may be possible in babies with an isolated cleft lip and in those with a narrow cleft palate. The breast tissue itself may be able to mold and can the others please mute? The breast tissue may mold and seal the gap. The mother can try holding the two sides of her lips of the baby's lips together. She may need to try out several different positions before finding the best one for her baby. The nipple has to stay at the back of the tongue, and the role of an experienced feeding nurse is very, very important for successful establishment of lactation. There are specially designed bottles and teats available for these babies. They are usually made of a soft squeezable plastic to help draw the milk without much effort. A long nipple with a Y cut at the tip is recommended. The Heberman feeder was designed by the mother. It is very useful when the baby has a weak suck. We all know the hazards of bottle feeding, so sterilization of the feeding bottle and the nipples is critical. This is a Heberman bottle. This is a reservoir for the milk, and this is a soft nipple with a Y cut, which makes expression of milk very easy. This is a recent innovation which is very, very useful in the feeding of children who are unable to suck. The Nifty Cup, it is reusable, boilable, and autoclavable. You can monitor the volume taken by the baby by the millimeters on the side of the cup. The soft silicone material is gentle against the mouth, unlike the metal palladi. There is a reservoir for the infant to lap the milk. The milk here comes into the reservoir and the infant laps the milk here. So this helps to control the pace of feeding, and the mother can directly express from her breast into the cup so that the risk of contamination is minimal. We are happy to say that Sri Ramchandra University was one of the pioneers in studying the effect of this cup, and we found that the design worked much better than what was anticipated. We have a very good feeding nurse in our department, Sister Jhansi. She patiently teaches the mothers to use feeding devices. This is a baby feeding out of a Nifty Cup. This baby has a cleft palate, but with correct positioning and with a Nifty Cup, we can find how comfortably he is able to take his feeds without any regurgitation through the nose. It is simple. She not only has to adjust to having an infant, she also has to face several other stresses: the facial difference, the need for multiple surgeries, multiple hospital visits, the effort that she has to put in to feed this baby, and sometimes the guilt and blame that invariably accompanies such a condition. So provision of professional psychological support can be beneficial before discharge from the hospital. Like all neonates, infants with a cleft should also have a hearing screening before discharge. Some of these infants may not pass the hearing screen because of middle ear effusion. So regular audiological evaluations and ENT assessments are a part of cleft care. Post-discharge follow-up, the most important aspects in the initial few weeks are gaining weight, preventing aspiration, and preventing ear infections. And the baby has to be evaluated by a cleft team as soon as possible after discharge. Even though the lip repair is usually done only between 5 and 6 months, if the cleft is wide, a cleft surgeon may recommend taping of the two sides of the cleft or nasoalveolar molding. These procedures physically bring the cleft edges together before cheloplasty and help in better outcomes. Non-syndromic infants should have the same growth pattern as any other infant. If there is poor weight gain, it is because of inadequate feeding, and the feeding technique has to be revised. This poor weight gain is often a cause for the surgery to be postponed. Our surgeons are comfortable if the baby has a weight of at least 5 kgs. It makes it easier for tissue handling. In addition to monitoring before the surgery, monitoring after the surgery is also important, because midline clefts may be associated with growth hormone deficiency, which is usually obvious only after the age of 1 year. First 1 year of life, it is nutrition that determines the growth of the infant. After 1 year, growth hormone becomes important. In addition to physical growth, developmental assessment is also important. Developmental delays and findings suggestive of an underlying syndrome may manifest later in life. Such children will need referral to an early intervention service or further genetic evaluation. There is no difference in the timelines for introducing complementary feeds to these babies. Parents, for some reason, feel that the palate should be repaired before they offer semi-solid food. This is not required at all, and delay in introducing semi-solid food may cause problems in the acceptance of these foods later. So the texture of the food should match the baby's stage of development. As with milk, this solid food may also pass into the baby's nose through the cleft palate. It may cause sneezing. This may be distressing to the parents, so they need reassurance. Finish the meal with a drink of water to help clear the food from the cleft area. Fitness for surgery, weight is an important criteria. As I said before, the surgeons would prefer to have a weight of minimum 5 kgs for lip repair, which is usually attained by the age of 5 months if the baby is growing well. There should be no acute respiratory GI or GU infection at the time of surgery. But please remember that serous nasal discharge is not a contraindication for surgery. It is very unfortunate that multiple times the surgery is postponed because of this reason, that the mother says the baby has some sully, when it is nothing but the chronic rhinitis that these children will always have. These children will have perennial discharge from the nose because of the irritation caused by the food particles to the nasal mucosa. So if the total counts and differential counts are normal, these patients can be taken up for surgery. Of course, the lungs have to be clear. We would prefer to have a hemoglobin of 9 grams per deciliter or above. But chronic well-compensated anemia is not a contraindication for surgery. Infective endocarditis prophylaxis may be indicated if there is an underlying heart condition. After surgery, the mother can usually start feeding the baby again by breast or by bottle as before. This does not damage the lip repair, but the bottle should not be used after palatoplasty. It should not be used for at least a month. This is because the negative pressure on the suture line may adversely affect the results. It may even result in palate breakdown or a palatal fistula. So it is better to train the baby to use some other feeding device even before the procedure. The same applies to the pacifier also. Pediatricians play an important role in promoting oral health through anticipatory guidance and dental referral. Babies do not produce much saliva in the first 2 months. With a cleft, milk enters the nose during feeds. This may leave deposits resulting in a snuffy baby. Formula-fed babies should be offered 2 to 3 spoons of cooled boiled water after each feed to remove the milk deposits from the nasal airways. Natal teeth and dental anomalies are common in children with clefts. Primary tooth eruption may be delayed. The eruption may be ectopic. These children are also more prone to caries. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that all the children should be seen by a dentist by 1 year of age, but we feel that at least those children with cleft lip and palate should meet a periodontist because the oral health influences the treatment outcomes. Orthodontic care is an integral part of cleft care. Crooked primary as well as permanent teeth are common. Throughout childhood and adolescence, monitoring of the facial growth and dental eruption is needed. Alveolar bone graft to fill the alveolar gap is usually done at 8 to 10 years. More than 90% of these children develop otitis media with effusion at least once during infancy. This can lead to mild to moderate conductive hearing loss. Many cleft centers are now placing a tympanostomy tube during lip repair if middle ear fluid is present. Those with a tympanostomy tube have better long-term speech and language outcomes. Even after palate repair, some 10 to 25% of these children will have a persistent cleft-related speech difficulty. This is because the soft palate does not adequately close against the posterior pharyngeal wall. This is called velopharyngeal insufficiency. The incidence of velopharyngeal insufficiency will depend upon the surgical technique as well as the timing of palatoplasty. So it is recommended that the speech team evaluates these babies even before palatoplasty to educate the parents regarding this possibility. This is the protocol our speech and language hearing sciences department follows. At the time of palate repair, communication screening, counseling of the parents about language development and language stimulation. At 18 months to 30 months, language assessment and management through parent training. 3 years onwards, institution-based language intervention and articulation assessment. Between 3 and 5 years, articulation correction if indicated, and at 5 years, resonance assessment and management if indicated. During adolescence, there is a risk of deviated nasal septum. Septorhinoplasty may be needed. Dr. Altaf has already described the possibility of mid-face hypoplasia. It is relatively common with the mandible being forward from the maxilla. These children may need mid-face advancement after the skeletal growth is completed. In summary, a pediatrician has a very important role to play in the management of these children. He or she has to be the sheet anchor for these families and the coordinator for the multidisciplinary care for these children from the time of diagnosis till the child transits into an adult. We have vast experience in managing these children. We used to see around 500 children every year. The surgery here is done free of cost. We have a very good support system. We have a dedicated team of nurses for training and supporting the families. We are passionate about breastfeeding, and around 50% of the babies who come to us in the first month of life get some amount of breast milk till their fifth month. We are also active in research to promote the quality of care that these children get. These are some of the research papers that we have published. Thank you all for this opportunity, and my sincere thanks to late Dr. Jyotsna Murthy for starting me on this journey. Thank you very much.
Ma'am, can you please stop sharing your screen?
I did that.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for the very elaborate presentation on how to manage these children perioperatively. We will now move on to the next talk. We have with us Ms. Mamta Carroll from Smile Train, who is the Vice President and Regional Director Asia, to pay tribute to Dr. Jyotsna Murthy. For those who do not know who Mamta Carroll is, she has been instrumental in developing impactful and sustainable cleft care programs across the country and Asia at large.
Hello everyone, my name is Mamta Carroll. I'm Vice President and Regional Director Asia at Smile Train. Today we honor an exceptional human being, a Smile Train hero and a guardian angel for children born with clefts, Dr. Jyotsna Murthy. It has been a year since we lost her, but even today I still feel her energy, her passion and compassion for children in need. Dr. Murthy worked with Smile Train since 2001, making her one of our oldest and most valued partner surgeons. With 29 years of experience and more than 7,400 Smile Train cleft surgeries, Dr. Murthy was acknowledged as a trailblazing surgeon by her peers, not only in India, but across the world. Under her leadership, Smile Train's cleft program at SRMC Chennai developed into a robust, comprehensive care center, providing holistic care to cleft patients. She could so easily see the human being behind the birth difference, and patients responded to this with empathy and trust. Her unwavering passion, commitment, and dedication to children with clefts was unmatched. Dr. Jyotsna fully embraced Smile Train's Teach a Man to Fish model by training, mentoring, and guiding young cleft surgeons and medical professionals. In her memory, Smile Train announced the Dr. Jyotsna Murthy Smile Train Cleft Fellowship Program at Sri Ramchandra Medical College and Research Institute, Chennai. This was done last year to ensure that we carry her legacy forward by enabling the next generation of cleft surgeons to follow in her footsteps and continue to transform the lives of children with clefts. Smile Train, as many of you may know, is an international non-profit organization which is focused on a single solvable problem: cleft lip and palate. Smile Train has supported more than 1.5 million surgeries across the globe in more than 90 plus countries. Our vision is a world where everyone has access to safe, high quality, comprehensive care and is able to live a full and healthy life. Smile Train's sustainable model provides training, funding, and resources to empower local medical professionals and hospitals across India to provide totally free cleft surgery to poor children in their own communities. Since the year 2000, Smile Train has supported more than 6,25,000 surgeries in India alone, with a network of 150 plus partner hospitals. Today's topic is very, very relevant and very crucial. The role of a pediatrician in cleft care. Pediatricians have a very important role in helping families of children with clefts and find multidisciplinary team care. They are a primary contact for most of our patients and their parents and can provide timely feeding advice and counseling. As part of a multidisciplinary cleft team, they monitor and manage growth and milestones for the child. I sincerely thank Dr. Padmasini, Dr. Altaf Hussain, and the entire cleft care team of SRMC to organize this CME. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your heartfelt sentiments and your kind words. We will now move on to the next session of addressing the question and answers from the audience. May I request Dr. Ramachandran, Professor of Pediatrics, to moderate the questions to the speakers, please.
Thanks, Professor Altaf Hussain and Professor Padmasini for that enlightening talk. We have a few questions. So some I have put myself. So one is question I put is how early this orofacial cleft can be recognized antenatally. It's unmuted. I'm audible now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. May I answer the question now?
Yeah, the question is, you can just repeat for the sake of others. So
how early can orofacial cleft be recognized antenatally? Prenatal scans as early as 13 to 14 weeks gestation can identify a cleft of the lip and the alveolus, but a cleft of the palate, either the baby has to yarn for the sonologist to be able to see the palate, or it may be missed. But cleft lip and alveolus, 13 to 14 weeks gestation.
I mean,
can I just
said, yeah. Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt. 13 to 14 is in very expert hands. Generally, we tend to get more like 17 to 18 weeks. That's when we, sometimes even later, about 20 weeks plus. Like she said, like Padmasini said, it depends on how the baby is. Sometimes the baby is facing away from the probe. You get nothing, and palate, very difficult to recognize. Very few people are able to pick it up. So on an average, I would say in expert hands, like she said, 13, 14, otherwise much later.
Thank you, sir. The next question is on regarding the feeding, Professor Padmasini.
Yes, sir.
As you have rightly said, all of us, all the people want the best for the child's feeding. But is there any way you can, we are talking about cleft palate mainly. So is there any way that any techniques or anything which will promote a better type of breastfeeding? Any particular position of the mother with the baby?
Sir,
or will it be done under supervision initially?
Sir, our feeding nurse, she's been trained in lactation support. She tries different positions to see which is the best position, most comfortable for the mother and most comfortable for the baby. But if the cleft is wide, the purpose of direct breastfeeding will not be to provide nutrition to the baby. The nutrition will still come from only expressed breast milk. The sucking, as I said before, is only to create a bond and to establish lactation in the mother. For children who have only a cleft lip, it is possible to get a good latch and a good suck by just approximating the lips. This assessment and advice is given by the feeding nurse. And we monitor the adequacy by seeing the weight gain of the baby.
What time do you want the pediatrician to refer a child with a cleft palate and cleft lip, or either combined or isolated, to be referred to a specialized clinic?
Sir, as early as possible. Like I said before, there are some instances when nasoalveolar molding will be required for bringing the two edges together, two edges of the cleft together. Even though it is not an emergency, they don't have to rush to the cleft clinic. It is better that they see the cleft team as early as possible after birth. One visit. Subsequent follow-up is with the pediatrician till the child requires a lip repair.
Thank you.
Can,
Dr.
can
Arul Kumaran.
I,
Yeah, yes, sir. Sir, please.
Can I just add to Dr. Masani's thing? Like she said, as soon as possible, because if at all we choose to do nasoalveolar molding, then it has to be done in the first 40 days. Because if you do not, that's the time when maternal hormones circulating the baby allow for the bone to be molded. If you miss that 40 days, then it's difficult to do nasoalveolar molding. So the earlier the better, prenatal even better. And they did not, like Padmasani said, they did not send the baby in an ambulance wrapped in a blanket right across, but they can contact us and fix a time in the first 2 to 3 days. Is that acceptable, Dr. Padmasani? 2 to 3 days should be all right.
Absolutely. In fact, we offer shared care. We are willing to share the care of these infants. The infants can continue to remain in the place of birth till they are comfortable. Why should a postpartum mother or an LCS mother come along with the baby to a center like this? They can contact us over phone and we can be in touch till the baby is fit to travel.
Right, sir. Sir, just subsidiary for this question. In Tamil Nadu, is there any other Smile Train center or it's only here at Ramchandra?
Dr. Altaf?
Yeah, there are several centers. There are about 150, 200 centers throughout the country. There are several centers. Not all of them are multidisciplinary. Not all of them offer comprehensive cleft care. So you need to know which are the centers which can actually really provide comprehensive cleft care from birth till the child completes its growth, which is about 18 years.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Arul Kumaran raises an important question. This is regarding the submucous cleft palate, which is first how to recognize this. So should we palpate all the children, the palate at least once? Second, what will be the symptoms and what will be the line of management for the submucous cleft?
Can I answer that, Padmasani?
Sir, yeah, I think it is more in your domain.
Yeah, okay. Okay, a submucous cleft is actually, it could be a complete or incomplete cleft, but it's bridged over by mucosa. As you know, when the fetus develops, the ectoendodermal envelope forms first, and then the muscles migrate. So in the cleft, you have the mesodermal component and you have the ectoendodermal component. So in a cleft, since the fusion does not happen, normally in the 4th to 6th week of intrauterine life, we'll just confine ourselves to the palate now for brevity. The palate, the two halves of the palate, the hemipalates fuse together, and then the muscle from the branchial arches migrates into this envelope. So it forms the muscle, which is the key muscles of these are the levator velar palatini and palatoglossus and palatopharyngeus. They need to meet their opposite number across the midline and form a sling, so that the soft palate is able to move and close against the posterior pharyngeal wall. In a cleft, this does not happen. The muscle doesn't meet its opposite number. So when the baby tries to close its palate against the posterior pharyngeal wall, it just opens wider. In a submucous cleft, the the edges have come together, but the mesodermal crossing has not happened. So you will have what looks like a normal cleft, but there are several indicators that it could be a submucous cleft. One is there could be a bifid uvula. The uvula is usually bifid. And then if there is a gray or whitish gray line in the midline, which shows that the it's a reflex from the thinned out mucosa which bridges the two halves. Since the muscle has not crossed, so there is a fine line visible in the midline of the palate. And then if you put your finger onto the posterior border of the hard palate, normally one would feel the posterior nasal spine. That is at the midline of the posterior border of the hard palate. In a submucous cleft, may not be in all cases, but in most cases, you can feel 2 points instead of one posterior nasal spine. That's the unfused posterior border of the hard palate. So you will be feeling the two hemispines. And then sometimes sometimes these are subtle signs. It's not easy to pick it up. So sometimes it so happens that when the child starts speaking and it goes nasal, you probably have to redo the entire. Maybe it may not be a good idea to put a finger into every child's mouth and have a look, but certainly have a look at the palate. If any of the signs of bifid uvula, a grain line in the midline, and if these suspicious things are there, put your finger there to see the posterior nasal spine. In spite of all this, even in the developed world, sometimes these are missed. Only when the child has difficulty in speaking, it gets diagnosed.
And regarding the treatment for this?
Yes, it's a palate repair. We need to do a complete palate repair for this. So the earlier, the better. If a child has grown up, I mean, if I find that a baby has a bifid uvula and has all the signs of submucous cleft, I would repair it. And at times, an ultrasound scan can give you more information, but you don't really need it. It's a clinical diagnosis mostly. But if the child has grown up with it, and if the child has normal speech, and the child is found to have a bifid uvula, say at 7-8 years, and nothing has happened to the palate till then, I would leave the child alone. There is only one risk: if the median mucosal bridge is breached by, say, a sharp object or some bone or something, the child is, then it could perforate. So it's better to operate, but in an older child with normal speech, I would think twice. I'll offer it to the parents.
Dr. Benjamin has asked a question to Dr. Padmasini and Dr. Altaf also. How frequently do you come across cleft with the other congenital anomalies? So what do you find as the most commonest?
So we have the data compiled for nearly 6,000 children in our center. We find that associated congenital anomalies, when I say congenital anomalies, I'm including the major as well as the minor ones. When we include even the anomalies in the digits, the non-life-threatening ones, we find that the incidence is maximum in children with both cleft lip and palate. Almost 32% of these children have these associated congenital anomalies. Those with cleft palate alone, around 22%, and those with cleft lip alone, around 11%. The commonest significant congenital anomaly is congenital heart disease. This we see in around 8% of these children.
And regarding the genetic or the child, which children you will choose to do some genetic screening? Is there any marker for genetic screening? Is it like multiple defects?
We are suggesting genetic. Yes, sir.
Please,
only those which have a syndromic association, or only those with syndromic associations, or those with multiple defects, we are suggesting genetic counseling. The commonest genetic disorder that has been identified is the velocardiofacial syndrome. But we are not suggesting genetic counseling for non-syndromic children with cleft lip and palate.
Can I
Yes, sir.
can I add
Yeah,
a
please,
little
sir.
to this? Like there are two kinds of clefts. We are talking about a non-syndromic orofacial cleft lip and palate, which is the commonest. I mean, the bulk of all the cases. And then you have a small subset of syndromic clefts, which may be associated with other syndromes. The commonest is Van der Waals. So, like Dr. Padmasani correctly said, the association of other congenital anomalies in non-syndromic clefts is not very high, but any of the any organogenesis that forms between 4 and 8 weeks of life, that's when the lips and palate come to fuse, could be could be affected. Like she said, you can have a cardiac disease, you can have urogenital membrane, you can have hypospadias, you can have spina bifida, anything that involves membranes, and then you can also rarely have syndactyles. So any anomaly that can, any insult that happens to the baby between 4 and 8 weeks of intrauterine life, any of these can be affected, but not very common, fortunately.
Right. Thank you. Thanks so much. One more question to, I think both of you can take it up. What advice do you give for regarding the recurrence risk for if one child is born with this problem, when they come for the next time counseling, the non-genetic, let us take it that, because that being the commonest. I'm sorry, non-syndromic. Sorry, non-syndromic. Dr. Padmasani, please unmute. Please unmute, Dr. Padmasani.
Dr. Altaf, is that your research interest, the risk of recurrence?
Well, it's not, well, we are trying to find a cause for non-syndromic cleft. There are several dozen suspect genes and suspect environmental factors. But we have not had a single, and unless it's a syndromic cleft, we are unable to pinpoint to a single gene or a single environmental factor. Some of them are exposed to these environmental factors and deliver normal children. Some of them with the least amount of exposure seem to have to bring out a baby with a cleft. And genes, there are about 15. I myself, between me and Jyotsna, I have about 11 papers, and she has probably equal number of papers. None of them are conclusive on the association between genes and the occurrence of non-syndromic cleft. About counseling, I'm sure Padmasani will be able to tell a little more about this. Basically, if you have a sibling or if you have an ancestor with a cleft, the risk is higher. There are several numbers which are commonly used, from different statistical studies. But then again, it's very difficult to put you can't answer a question, will my next child have a cleft? You can only say it's got a higher chance of having a cleft rather than it will or will not have. Maybe Padmasani can speak a little bit on that.
Yes, I agree with what Dr. Altaf has said. It is very difficult to say what is the chance of this sibling having the same problem, but generally the chance of recurrence of a non-syndromic cleft lip and palate in a sibling is almost 9%. If it is some other first degree relative and not the sibling, it can be even higher. If it's a parent, it can be as high as 14%.
Thank you, Dr. Padmasani and Dr. Altaf. I don't see any other questions in the chat box. Yeah, except that many people who have complimented both of you for a very comprehensive talk, and many other wanted to be put up in some this thing like a YouTube. They feel that it will be very useful, or even for those who could not attend this. So it will be of very great practical value. So the compliments to both of you from most of the people who have been listening to this. So from my side, I really thank for this wonderful opportunity to listen to both of you and learn a lot of new things, which I am definitely will be helpful to these children if they come to my care. Thank you so much. Over to the organizer.
Thank you, Professor Ramchandran. That was very kind of you to beautifully moderate the question answer sessions. And if there are no further questions from the audience, I would like to move on to thank everyone present here for your patient listening in spite of the initial glitches in the network, and the office bearers of the Academy of Pediatrics, the senior professors and teachers from Ramchandra University, and especially Dr. Altaf and Dr. Padmasini for your time and effort. And with this, we'll come to the closing session of the event. And thank you all once again for being present here.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Wonderful session. Thank you so much.